Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Dixon, and today we've got Denny Lecompte on the pod. He is the CEO of Portnox, which is a cybersecurity firm based here in Austin, Texas. He is a first-time CEO, so we dig into his journey from working at companies like SolarWinds in the product space to transitioning into being a first-time CEO of a PE-backed company. We talk about the journey of kind of going from that product role into a CEO, and then obviously the implications of being a CEO and having to grow a business, not having done it in the past. So very interesting episode to kind of learn about his journey, some of the things that he wish he would have done differently when he first started, and things that have gone really, really well. So if you're interested in kind of potentially becoming a CEO at some point, this is a great episode. So let's get Denny on the pod. Interested in hearing conversations with private equity leaders, CEOs of private equity-backed companies, and startup entrepreneurs where they share their stories about their career journeys, starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, and the important role that having the right talent plays in building a successful business, then you are in the right place. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. Here's your host, Justin Dixon. All right, Denny, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you on.
Hey, thanks, Justin. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So, well, let's get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way here. Maybe give everybody a little bit of an overview of who you are, where you are, and what you're doing right now.
So I am the CEO of Portnox, which is a cybersecurity company. We are based in Austin, Texas, although we have people all over the world. It's a remote first company. And what we do is we do access controls, but specifically network access controls. So we make sure that only the right people on the right devices can get to your network, to your data, to your apps, all that stuff.
Got it. And so, you looking at your background, and I know a little bit about you just from working together and connecting and things, but this is the first time you've been a CEO, right? At least
Yeah.
from what I could tell. And so, I'm just kind of curious, and I'll ask a few more questions about this, but how has it been? Because you've been a CEO for what, three years now, I think,
Yeah,
almost coming up on your anniversary date. So,
that's right.
how have the first 3 years been? Better, worse, as what you thought it was going to be going into it?
What I would say is usually it depends on how the quarter's going, which is the main
Okay.
thing I've learned. If you ask me right after a good quarter, like I love being a CEO. If you ask me after a quarter that's been hard, I love it less. So that rhythm coming out of the product world where I was before, with products, you get excited after you do a release, but the rhythm is longer, slower, and you're less tied to the quarters. And now what I've learned is you spend a lot of time very, very close to sales and marketing, and how you're doing, how you're feeling is all a function of how are you selling. And
Yeah.
that's been a new experience with its, again, its ups and downs. But overall, I have, gotten to really like the job a lot.
That's awesome. And so how did you prepare yourself, to make the transition? Because obviously going from being in, a bigger company, being a leader of a division or a team or whatever is one thing, but then being the head of a company is a bit different. So how do you kind of mentally prepare to take on the responsibility of the entire business?
Um, the only thing I did explicitly in my career to try and prepare for it was I did do some time as a general manager of a business within my broader business, uh, which is, I would say, much worse than being a CEO, because there you have a lot of the responsibilities, but they're huge. You don't control your budget. You can't make big decisions. You can't control the culture. So you have more accountability, or almost as much as a CEO for the P&L, but much less control. And so I did not enjoy that experience, and didn't think I even wanted to be a CEO until somebody called and tried to recruit me to be CEO. And then I found out, oh, apparently I do want this because I'm trying to get it. And then for the preparation, I don't know, like the main thing I've always liked is building teams. I like
Okay.
bringing together the right people, and again, getting everybody focused on the same thing, and sort of getting that to gel. And so the CEO, that's the job. Like that's mostly what you do is hiring the right people, making sure that everybody's on the same page. So I don't know. I didn't really do anything special to prepare. It's just deciding that that was the essence of what I liked more than product strategy or anything in particular. For me, it is really just the team building.
Got it. Well, from a team and a talent perspective, obviously jumping into a CEO role for the first time, never ever having kind of been a CEO, how did you assess the talent of the company that you were going to be taking over, right? Because it was an existing business that already had people. So how did you evaluate that? But then also, how did you think about the talent that you would need to surround yourself with to support the other parts of the business that you weren't aware of, right? Or didn't oversee. And, being a product person, you're focused on product, but, you didn't lead sales before from, being in the product leadership role. So how did you think about the talent you were absorbing or gaining, but then also what did you need to put around you to make sure that you were as successful as possible?
So I guess the interesting thing for our investors are Elsewhere partners, who you work with as well. And Elsewhere's model is to go take a bootstrapped company and then invest in it, bring in the CEO like me, often first-time CEOs, build out a sort of a growth team, and then try and get this thing to go from bootstrap companies tend to get to a certain point and they can't get bigger because they're unwilling or basically unwilling and unable to spend in the red for a while to like achieve growth. The thing is that I was able to very quickly assess that the vast majority of the people that were in the business when I inherited it were of a bootstrapping family. We all
Mm,
love each other. We don't care about growth. We just like to come into work and hang out. And so very quickly, oh, they're not the right people for the kind of business we need it to be. And so a lot of folks chose to leave. Some of them we managed out. And what we need to bring in were growth people.
okay.
How I figured out what I needed, this is what finally convinced me to take the CEO role, is I just knew so many fantastic people in other areas. I mean, I knew a lot of great product people because of course that was my area. But I also, the person who's now our CMO, I had worked with her previously and I knew she was really good marketer and that we could work well together. I did not know the right salespeople, so I did have people help me introduce, and that was probably the hardest one to get right. Like, who is exactly the right kind of person? So I think I probably fumbled around on that one for a while until a board member ultimately said, "Look, this is the guy. This is your business. This is the guy. I've worked with him." And so it's a bit of the transitive property. Like I really trusted this more board member, and he had depended on the guy that we ultimately hired, and he was right. But everybody else was frankly somebody I knew. And part of my theory of the case was that I have a bunch of people that I like that I know kind of like each other. If I bring them together, then we can do something. And then we had gaps, right? We did not have every single role with people that I knew, and so then we started to fill those in, and those were just kind of judgment calls and that a lot of it is trying to make sure. I kind of hate the phrase cultural fit because it I think brings a lot of baggage, but it
Yeah.
was these are people who think about the problem like we think about the problem, so that they will all want to be growth minded, willing to do kind of think about the hiring and firing the same way. Because ultimately, as I'm building out leaders, they're going to bring on people, and I need to make sure that they are going to hire the kind of people that maybe not who I would hire, but who are going to be the same kind of folks. Because I have worked with CEOs who want to have a say so on every single hire
Mm,
and be like, I just don't see how you can scale. It's also, there's just a level of arrogance in that I think anybody who's willing to be a CEO is arrogant to some extent, but I believe you should try and fight it. So I don't get involved in every single hire. So, but I do try and hire people who I believe are going to make more good decisions than bad. No one hires perfectly. If they
Yeah.
think they do, they're misguided.
Well, maybe they've only hired one person, right? And they're perfect for the one. They're one for one. Maybe that's.
Yeah, maybe
But
so.
yeah,
It
if you're hiring
hiring
at scale,
incredibly hard. It's
yeah,
so important, and it's just about the hardest thing that you do, because you're just making a guess as to, spending some time with somebody and then projecting them into a role inside of a team, inside of a particular set of circumstances. And is this going to work the way you think? I don't know. It's tough.
well, and the interesting part about the hiring part is, being in a big company, you had probably large teams that you manage, and one person who maybe was a C player could kind of get by, right? But when you're in a startup or a growth size company, one person can upset the apple cart, so to speak. And so, how do you assess kind of the fire fast mentality, if that's how you operate, of making sure that you brought in somebody maybe that wasn't exactly right? How quickly can you kind of make that pivot? And was that difficult, as a CEO, to kind of say, hey, my mistake, let's move, let's do something different, whether it's your hire or another hire, but there's obviously, involvement as far as that goes. So how does that work?
I mean, don't expect people to, like, don't expect people to change. The
Mm,
question is there a skill that they're missing that they can learn? Okay, people can learn skills. People don't change, certainly don't change in the context of a job. So if you've hired the wrong person and you figure that out, what are you waiting for? Right? Like, I don't want to sound savage about the whole thing, but to some extent, like, that is, we do want to fire fast.
yeah,
If we screwed up, you want to be as forthright, and you want to be as generous as you can afford to be with them, but don't mess around. Don't 6 months is not going to help you. In 6 months, you're just going to be sorry. And I've never had to let someone go that I didn't think, God, I should have done that sooner. Like, that's always what I think,
yeah,
because and that's just generally how the team is. And we try to, and I mean, we've made mistakes over the last 3 years. There are people who we dragged along for a while, just we really wanted them to succeed, and we tried everything, and we're like, that was really bad. Because in the end, the way like, you can deal with how bad it feels, because it never feels good. If you feel good firing somebody, that's not great about you.
right,
You should feel bad because you've made a mistake, and you've made a mistake for your company, but more importantly, you've made a mistake for them. Like, they've
yeah,
upended whatever they were doing before, and they've wasted time on you. So you should feel your tremendous kind of regret that you made a mistake. Understanding, no one's perfect, but you have to figure that out as quickly as you can and just deal with it, because the rest of the team is impacted.
yeah,
Like you said, in a startup, every role, if you're doing this right, is super important. If you have extra, like, you're wasting money, right? You don't have any excess at all. So you're just trying to like maximize every single function. So yeah, like, if you can figure it out in 2 or 3 months, then that is the time you should, like, get something done, and then try and bring in a better person who is going to fit, because everybody's depending on these humans.
yeah. I think there's like a rule. It's like firing somebody or letting somebody go hurts both sides for like 36 or 48 hours. And then you realize, okay, this is a better option, right? When one door closes, another door opens for both sides of the equation. As a first time CEO, like, was there one part of the business, being private equity backed? So obviously you are the chief executive officer, but you obviously report up to a board, and so you've got to
Yeah.
make sure that you've got your numbers in order. Was there one part of being a CEO that, or area of the business, that was more difficult to wrangle or understand or kind of wrap your arms around than others? Because obviously your product background, you probably could lean in very heavily on the product side if necessary. But was there anything that kind of was like, wow, this was different than what I expected going into it?
It's just sales. I mean, I had spent time bopping around, so I knew probably more about marketing than I should. I've ended up managing parts of marketing for
Okay.
weird reasons in my prior life. So I understood marketing. You would never hire me to be the marketer, but I
Mm,
know how it works. So I knew what I wanted and a head of marketing, and I got that. And so that the piece I never really had gotten like my fingers dirty with was sales. And it's hard. It is not purely intellectual. So you can't just be smart about sales, like being good at sales. There's an awful lot of human stuff, motivation, and trying to like train people, uh, and then just parts I didn't know, like how do you figure out you have the right number of salespeople, how much you're spending. This is a private equity thing, which is there are a whole bunch of metrics. This is what I've told my investors that they should train all their new CEOs on, because I learned it later than I should have. There's just metrics that they're looking for around sales efficiency. Uh, there's a thing called magic number, which is if you spend this much on sales and you divide that by how much ARR you got. Like, so basically, if I invest $1 into sales and marketing, I should get as close to at least I should get $1 out of ARR out of that.
Okay.
So if you spend two new dollars on sales and marketing and you only get one new dollar of ARR out of it, you suck. 50.5 is terrible.
Yeah.
Anything over one, and they're like, that's why they call it the magic number. You're like, well, if you're over one, you probably should spend more. So
Yeah.
you're trying to be just under one, like somewhere like 0.8, zero 0.9. That means that you're because you're spending $1, you're getting a little bit less than $1. But hopefully, if you are keeping that customer for years, you're making multiple dollars.
Yeah.
Um, and I did not understand that. So I think at the beginning I spent too much relative to what I was getting.
Mm.
And so that was probably the other thing, just like understanding, oh, like I do this thing over here, and very quickly I'm spending more than I want because of because the other thing I didn't know is finance, and I didn't get a CFO right out of the gate, and that was dumb. And
Okay.
so I now have a great CFO who is constantly trying to make sure that I don't do stupid shit.
Just constantly saying you shouldn't spend this, or giving you kind of ideas on how to optimize your spending.
I mean, look, the way I treat it is like I have to negotiate with him. If I
Right.
just, I mean, I guess I'm the CEO. I could just tell him, let's do this thing that you think is dumb, but then that would make me dumb. So his whole point is to try and be conservative. And so we work together, like this is what we're trying to accomplish. And, he makes sure that all that accounting stuff, the finance, the predictions, the forecasting, he's amazing, but he's a fantastic partner in all of that.
Yeah, and I think that you have to have the guardrails, right? Like if you're just spending willy-nilly, and you're not paying attention, it could get out of control, and then that's where problems kind of happens. So I would imagine having a good finance partner that lets you kind of go out, take a little bit of rope, but then pulls it back in if it gets too far.
Right.
Um, You've got an interesting background outside of just your career. You've got a PhD in cognitive sciences, I believe is what the title was,
Yeah,
cognitive science.
yeah, cognitive science. I mean, I did it in the cognitive psychology department.
Okay.
But when I tell people that I have a degree in cognitive psychology, they think I'm a therapist, which I was definitely never a therapist and was not in any way interested in
Yeah.
that. I studied human memory was
Okay.
my focus, and I did that for a while. I thought that was the only thing I wanted to do until I was like, I don't want to do this anymore, which is why I always tell the younger people in my extended family when they are so worried about what they're majoring in, yeah, you should stop worrying about it because you're not going to do that. You're going to change. You just don't
Yeah.
know how.
Have you seen yourself use some of the concepts from your psychology and this cognitive science degree as you're interviewing people, or as you're assessing talent, or just interactions throughout the day? Like, do you see yourself falling into like, oh, that was something I picked up, or I'm just kind of curious.
Yes, I would say that is a core part of who I am. I spent a long time. So in the end, I am a cognitive scientist. I think like that. I frame everything in terms of that research. No, it does not mean I can read your mind. That is not a thing. You'd be surprised how many people ask me that.
Yeah.
But it's you look at the way people make decisions. I think a lot about you learn a lot about when you're doing scientific experiments, you learn a lot of statistics. And to this day, I use that sort of statistical thinking. So it's very useful. If probably not what I would have done if I'd known I wasn't going to do it for very long, but
Yeah.
it continues to shape who I am.
That's interesting. Yeah, your background is kind of just very unique, kind of having that PhD. I don't see a lot of C-suite having, cognitive science PhDs, at least not that I've paid attention to.
No, it's a harder career pivot than most people make in their 30s.
Yeah. And I guess as you kind of grew up in some of these bigger companies, I mean, SolarWinds was probably fairly small when you started, but they grew pretty rapidly. And then I guess what kind of was the pivot point for you to leave there? And then how did you get introduced to elsewhere and the CEO concept? I want to kind of circle back to just because I'm imagining there's people that are going to listen to this and think about, well, maybe I'm a CPO or a CMO and I'd love to be a CEO of a private equity backed company, but it's not like they post these jobs on Indeed or
Right.
LinkedIn. Like you've got to, and there also is not a clear ladder, going, there is a
No.
ladder going from like VP of product to SVP to, CPO, but then how do you make that jump to the CEO? So I'm just kind of curious kind of how that worked.
Um, so I actually left SolarWinds, came back, and then left again. So the second time when I came back, leaving was sort of obvious because I had come back to work with, work for the CEO who I'd worked for before, and then he was leaving, and there was a
Mm,
new CEO coming in, and nice enough guy, but I didn't really stick around to find out because it didn't matter. Because what became very clear to me very quickly is that I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to work for him anymore. And then I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Getting another CPO job was sort of the default. I had thought
yeah.
about that. And what I have learned about myself is I get bored of stuff like of cognitive psychology, of usability engineering, of whatever I've been doing for a while. If I feel like I can already project what's going to happen for the next 4 or 5 years, I don't want to do it because
Yeah.
why would I do that? So I wanted to do something new. I knew the elsewhere guys because a lot of them, John Thornton was on our board. He had been on the board of SolarWinds. I
Okay.
had met Chris Pasidi before. Like there are a bunch of Austin guys, and there's a bunch of ex-SolarWinds people like Rita Silvaggi who were in the elsewhere portfolio. And I had worked with Rita both at SolarWinds and I had worked with her at Alien Vault. And I mean, I don't know if this is how you're supposed to get a CEO job, but I just went to read it and I said, I kind of think I like the elsewhere model. I think I want to do this. Do you think they'd be interested? And then she asked them if they also liked me. And we turned out that they were also interested. And it's kind of I don't know, maybe that's a dumb way for this to happen. It certainly feels like the most ridiculously privileged thing to just go, hey, I'd like to be a CEO. Can I? And
Right.
they said, yeah, we will do that. But the reason it worked is because they knew so many people who knew me,
Yep.
right? So what I would say is that didn't just happen. I spent a lot of time building I mean, not super intentionally, but when I like people, I do try to keep in touch with them. And so I've done that. So I have a fairly broad network of people that I've worked with. And fortunately enough, they've had a good opinion of me. And so I think when the elsewhere guys like did the obvious checks on me, they were like, oh yeah, he seems like he'd be great. And
Yeah.
but the work was, 15 years in Austin of just knowing a bunch of people and kind of being interested in them and helping them get jobs, right? When I know people, I've connected lots of folks over the years. And so that to me, that's networking. If your networking is just a self-centered, I'm going to go and try and get you to help me,
Yeah.
uh, you're not going to be very successful because people can read that. Like a lot of networking is you helping people,
Yeah,
is
and not expecting
connecting.
anything in return, right? It's just
No,
not looking at it what's in it for me. It's just building a network and helping people because it's the right thing to do versus, oh, that person knows that person, so they're going to connect me, and yeah, so it's
No, for me, it's having lunch with people I like. That's mostly what networking is. I
yeah,
like them. I want to see them again. I haven't met, I haven't talked to them in a while. And then I find out, like, what do we share in common? Well, a lot of it's work. So we talk about work. And then, when they're looking for a job, they're like, hey, you know anybody? And so it turns out I do. And so then I introduce them. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. But you don't do it. I guess you can do it with a really self-centered motivation, but I don't think I ever thought of it that way because that's most of the time, most of what you're doing is helping other people or just staying in touch with people you like. If you're networking with people you don't like, you are just better than me. Like, good for you. I can't do it. If I hang out with you, it's because I like you.
yeah. Well, that's fair. Well, hopefully, you being on the podcast means you like me a little bit, so that's at least a positive in my book.
Yeah.
Um, Being in the kind of private equity backed startup world, what are you seeing? And how I don't know how connected you are to kind of other startups or the ecosystem, whether it's in Austin or more broadly. But you know, you started at Port Knox in October 2021, so obviously it was kind of in the heyday of everybody kind of was grow at all cost, and obviously elsewhere's model is a bit different. But what is your kind of sense on the kind of private equity backed or the startup ecosystem market at the moment? We're recording this in September of 2024, so interest rates are potentially going to lower, start going down. We don't
Oh,
know.
that'd
We've
be
got an
nice.
election in a little bit, so there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts that can happen coming out of that. So yeah, just kind of what's your kind of sense on the startup world at the moment?
It's been an interesting 3 years because in 2021, everybody was overpaying for startups.
Hmm.
Because you can see on graphs of like startup multiples, there's this big, huge bump, and then it comes back down in 2022. And they were overpaying for startups, and then startups were overpaying for people. They were like
Yeah.
everybody's salary was just exploding. So hiring was very difficult at that time because if you wanted good people, you just had to be competitive. And so then all of those sins were paid for in 2022 because then when sort of the interest rates started to go up and all the private equity realized, oh, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that it's not going to be easy money for a while. And so they just started pulling in. And so you saw a huge change. You saw it's not that startups went under. It's actually the biggest thing that happened was startups that had overhired. They they did a lot of cuts. We got some good people in 2022 because
Mm,
other people had cut them. We did not have that problem because like everybody's come to look more like elsewhere where they're all rule of 40 and
yeah.
let's have a cautious balance between growth and burn. And I think more companies have been like that. I think the interesting thing, because we talked to a lot of, potential future investors, we talked to bankers just to make sure that everybody knows where we're at, because if you would like your startup to ever be acquired, um, you kind of want to be on everybody's radar. And it turns out bankers is the way you do that.
Yeah.
So we talked to all these folks, and the message we definitely get back is that there are a bunch of startups that are going to like they reined in their spending, but they're still going to run out of money. They
Mm,
haven't grown the way they need to grow. And so they're either looking at a vicious down round or just selling for whatever they can get, kind of a fire sale situation. So some companies are in that situation. A lot more companies are in a wait and see
yeah.
kind of mood, where if you're doing okay but not great, I think there's a lot of investors who are telling their companies to just keep going. If you're self-funding, just self-fund. We're not gonna, but nobody's throwing a ton of money. Like nobody's interested in a super high burn situation like growth at all costs. No, growth has a cost and we care about it. That's the new message.
Yeah, well, you can't just push that cost onto the next buyer, right? You have to actually, take it into account for yourself. And I've talked to a lot of private equity folks and startup kind of people, and the other thing that I'm hearing that's out there is companies are staying on private equity's kind of balance sheets, if you will, longer than their anticipated 3 to 5 year hold period. So
Yeah.
they either need to sell them maybe for lower than what they would want so they can return some equity back to their shareholders or their investors, or they just have to kind of keep them and maybe reinvest. Are you kind of seeing anything in that vein of kind of just private
The
equity holding on
holding.
longer?
Yeah, we see the holding. I'm not sure about the reinvesting.
Mm,
Sometimes, and I'm sure somebody who knows PE better than I do will maybe say this, the analogy is too simple, but it's a little bit like in real estate where nobody can sell their house because
yeah,
they have a low interest rate, and if they move, they're gonna for the same house they pay a ton more, and so they're like, yeah, you know what, I'm just gonna sit where I am, even if it's not exactly what I want. I think we see that, um, where people are just they're just waiting. They're hoping that something's going to change. And if interest rates come down, I mean, I doubt we're going to go down to the 0% days again,
yeah,
because that would suggest that things have gone horrible in the economy. But they can't wait forever because you do have to put the limited partners' money to work. You're going to have to invest in it. There is the so-called flight to quality. Like if you have good metrics, you're growing well, you have good net dollar retention, good gross dollar retention, you're not burning too much. Like you are attractive. And so they are anxious to put money in a company that looks like that. But if you've got too many warts, like it's hard times.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think there's a lot of potential opportunity coming out of that, but also there's a lot of potential pain too that's gonna kind of need to get sifted out. Um, if somebody's kind of listening to this and they're like, "Hey, I want to be where Denny is in 3 to 5 whatever years it is," maybe they're sitting at another company and they're a VP of marketing and they see a path to CMO, and then maybe they see a path to, maybe a CEO job. Like, what are some things that maybe you would recommend them doing now, maybe outside of just trying to network for, but not thinking about it as like I'm building this network for that end game, but anything else they can kind of do to prepare themselves for a potential first time CEO role?
Get out of your box, right? Like the reason that I think I felt ready was because, again, for a bunch of weird reasons, I ended up like poking around marketing. I already knew product and engineering because I had lived in that world. And then you're up pretty close to support if you're in
Mm,
product engineering. So how many of the major functions do you know? People I know who have tried the CEO role who really were deep but not broad have struggled
okay.
because there's so much stuff you don't know what you're talking about, and so it makes it harder to hire because you don't know what good looks like. um, so if you're in some function, can you get your boss to let you also manage something else? Like go take a risk, go learn something. You will be clueless at first and it will be scary. But if a job is not scaring you to some extent, and you aren't, that doesn't excite you, then you should not be a CEO because it's terrifying most of the time. Like you have to be interested in like pushing yourself if you want to do this. So step one, push yourself from where you are. Like, hey, go to them, say, I am interested in learning more. What else can I take on? How can I help the business? Um, and just, and honestly, look at your colleagues, try and understand their worlds as much as possible. I mean, I don't know squat about finance and whatnot. Like you wouldn't want me to balance your checkbook. But I have spent a lot of time with the finance people and I have tried to, this is actually coming from my product management background, is trying to understand what are their priorities? Why do they get mad at me when I do certain things
Mm,
uh, with product or pricing? And, I learned way more about revenue recognition than I ever wanted to, but I did it because it kept impacting. I kept making decisions that were impacting them. So I got myself smart about, well, these are their priorities. So I can anticipate at least some of what they thought. But
yeah.
even when they explained it to me, I understood it. So let me tell you, almost everybody, if you go into their world and say, can you really explain to me how your stuff works and why it works that way and what you care about? Look, very few people are interested in what you do at that level of detail. Probably not even your spouse. They might tolerate it, but they probably don't actually care. So if you show genuine interest in like how finance works or what does the customer success team, what are their motivations? And like understand all the parts of the business and how the machine works together and what the balances are. If you can really do that, then you're going to be, I think, better off because you do need that perspective. Oh, if I mess with this over here, it's going to have this other impact. Because every group, you know, sales and marketing are usually at loggerheads, and it's set up that way because the incentives. But you have to understand, it's if you're just inside of sales and you're like, oh, those marketing people, they're so awful because they don't ever give me the leads and blah blah blah, without understanding marketing has a set of constraints that they've been given, and they're doing like if you moved over into marketing, you would suddenly behave just like them.
Mm,
Like even the best marketer, they have a set of things that they're working with. You should understand that. And if you do, and you understand not as well as a CMO or as your CRO, but like well enough that you can talk to them, you're better off. That would be that's probably the thing that served me the best is just being genuinely interested in how everybody's thing works, even if I don't want to do it.
yeah. Yeah, because your point, you're gonna have to, if you're the CEO, you're gonna have to hire somebody in that world, right? And or at least kind of evaluate that talent. So getting at least a little bit of a high level overview.
And talk to them every week about their
Yeah,
job
that's right.
and actually care. Like, because that's the thing is that you're going to be talking about sales or marketing or engineering. Like you need if you don't find any of that stuff interesting, what are you doing? Like stay
Yeah.
where you are. Go do something else. Like you have to be a little bit interested in everything. And like want your fingers a little bit in everything without micromanaging it. Like that's got to be what's interesting to you. I mean, unless what you like is people, I don't know, listening to you because you're CEO. Like maybe that's a reason some people want to do it. That's a terrible reason.
Yeah.
Um, Again, I think that's one of those things where everybody defers to you automatically. I think it's very deeply embedded in people. And you could get used to it if you let yourself. And I think you should not let yourself. You should constantly be asking, like, are they just agreeing with me because they think they're supposed to?
Mm.
Because if so, you're going to start doing dumb stuff.
Was micromanaging ever an issue being his first time CEO? Did you ever get into something too deeply, maybe a product because you know product really well, or maybe something you didn't know that you're like, holy crap, I'm like really deep in this and I shouldn't be.
Um, Yes. But generally when I found like I was deeply involved in sales, it's like, oh, that's because I have the wrong sales leader.
Mm,
I'm getting involved because I don't like the results I'm seeing and I'm trying to help. And the answer is I'm not helpful. The answer is I have the wrong person. I need somebody who knows way more than me and way more than the person who's leading it. Um, so I don't know that was micromanaging. The people you should ask if I'm a micromanager are the people who work for me because then they have the right opinion. They know whether I'm a micromanager.
fair
I
enough.
actually have had that problem on product. I ignore product and engineering the most
Mm,
because I hired an incredible CPO, an incredible CTO, and I just completely trust them. I've known them each for like 10 plus years. So I don't need to worry about it.
yeah.
And chief product officer, I hired him as probably his first product management job was working for me, and then he quickly became better than me.
Mm,
And so that has never changed. So he's still better than me. So what am
yeah.
I? So we just, I trust his decisions. I don't want to get into his details.
No, fair enough. So I want to wind this thing down a little bit here, but before we kind of get into the final part, what do you think the next 12 months for Portnox looks like, maybe kind of broadly and also just from a startup kind of ecosystem perspective? Obviously, we already mentioned some of the potential bumps in the road that could happen with interest rates and the election and everything. But yeah, what does that kind of look like?
Um, we are at a point where we have the right team and we kind of have the right formula. So mostly I just think of it as turning up the gas and
Mm,
growing is what we need to do. Um, and a decision is going to need to be made on whether we just do that organically. Do we go raise some more capital to go faster? And for that, it's really we are in the middle of, planning the next you got to kind of do the next 2 years because
okay.
you need to know next year. And at least we have our sales cycles long enough that the stuff you do in the second half of the year will determine, 2026.
Yep.
So you really need to think at least one extra year. And so as we're planning that, that's probably the biggest thing, is just more of what we're doing and just constantly looking at all the parts of the business that are not the way we want it to be and trying to figure out, okay, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is what it does look like. How do we close that gap? Who do we need in the business that isn't here now to help us do that? So it's not, there's not any sort of big pivots or anything. We're big enough now that we just need to keep doing more of what we're doing to grow. And so I have a better, I probably have a better picture of what 2025 looks like than I did of what 2022 looked like when I first
Mm.
started.
Okay.
Because that was like, I don't know, like there's a lot
Yeah.
of changes. We transformed the business completely. So by the end of 22, it looked really, really different, but that was not as obvious. Here, it's just going to look like a slightly bigger version, and just tremendous focus, getting back to the PE world, on unit economics.
Yeah.
Can you make it so that selling, one unit of your product is, like it makes sense to invest more money to sell one more unit, and that you're going to make money doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, because then it's just a matter of having the cash to keep stacking, and then you just keep growing and keep winning. So,
You just do that until you start to see returns diminishing. Like, and if you've got a really big market, and you've got the right product and you got the right team, you'll go. Eventually, every product hits some sort of ceiling. I like to say most companies have their one trick ponies, and the real question is how good is that trick?
mm,
And Google's trick, extremely good trick. Like
right,
search, amazing business. Everything else they do, who cares? All the
right.
money comes from that one amazing trick. So I think about that all the time. We've got a good trick. I think we can be many times larger than we are now. And so, and then one day we'll hit that ceiling, but we can tell it's a long, long way from now.
Well, that's a positive outlook for sure, and I appreciate all the time. I want to kind of transition to the three pack of questions that I ask every guest. That's a little less focused on business and a little bit more about Denny. So, first question here is, what is your favorite business book?
Ooh, my favorite business book. I mostly despise business books, and if you were trying to punish me, you would make me read them.
Okay.
But I will say, Annie Duke's book "Quit" was probably
Mm,
the last. I'm going to call it a business book because she talks a lot about business, but it's she is also was a cognitive scientist. She didn't finish her PhD. She ended up all but dissertation and then became a poker player.
right.
So I probably like her because she thinks the way I think, but I don't, I'm no good at poker. But what she talks about is knowing when to quit. And it is one of the most important things, especially in a startup, is this isn't working. Stop doing it. Go do something else,
Yeah.
because that's counterintuitive. But I really love that book.
Got it. I think I've heard of that one. I don't know if I've actually read it, but I definitely have heard of it.
She's got two or three. They're all great. She's
Yeah.
she's she's a fun writer, and they're very practical no matter what it is you do.
Got it. All right. Second question here is, what is your favorite thing to do outside of work, other than read people's minds, I guess?
I read books. I read a tremendous amount. I always have. If I'm, I get to the point where I can't spend all day reading, so then I'll go occasionally do something else. But I read a lot.
Do you have a specific genre? Because obviously business books are not your favorite, but do you have a specific genre that
It's
you focus
it's
on?
it's all fiction. I read a tremendous amount. I'm a proper nerd. I read a lot of science fiction, a decent amount of fantasy, and then everything else is probably literary fiction, and a little bit of kind of history, politics, kind of nonfiction, but it's probably like 90% fiction.
Got it. Fair enough. Last question here. Favorite vacation spot?
Santa Fe. I really
Santa
like
Fe.
Santa Fe. Yeah. It's a very laid back. If you live in Austin, it's miserable in the summer. You can go there. It's the high desert.
Okay.
Uh, but it's also like an art community that lives
Oh,
there.
interesting. Okay.
So really laid back, big kind of native peoples population in the area. So that the art, the cool air. It's just a cool place.
Got it. Never been, but definitely have to check it out. So, Denny, this has been awesome. I really appreciate the time. If somebody's listening to this and they want to learn more about your journey, Port Knox, anything like that, is there a best way to kind of catch you?
Sure. You can always email me, denny@portknox.com.
Got it. We will have that in the show notes. Denny, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks a bunch, Justin. I've enjoyed it.
I hope you found at least one actionable insight from this episode of the Growth Capital Podcast, your one-stop shop for insights from private equity leaders, CEOs, and startup entrepreneurs on starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, as well as the role having the right talent plays in growing a successful business. It would be greatly appreciated if you would rate and review this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and drop us a comment so we can expand the audience of this podcast. Thank you for all your support, and don't forget about upcoming episodes dropping every Tuesday.